What's up, Laker fans? Welcome to the Laker Film Room Podcast. I'm Pete, joined by Darius and a special guest who, come to think of it, I'm not sure has ever been on this podcast before. Harrison, have you ever been on the pod before?
So I have. I was going to say, first of all, thank you for having me.
It's it wasn't memorable, obviously. Yeah.
How long have you been doing this pod?
You weren't there, Pete.
2016. Oh, that's right. I was in the hospital.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I was gonna say thank you. I finally get to make a podcast appearance while Pete is conscious. This is big growth for our relationship. Like, he finally voluntarily let me on the pod. This is awesome.
That's why I was like, why do I have no recollection of this? I feel less bad that I had no memory at all.
You didn't even listen to the episode, Harrison.
I think a lot of memory that week.
Yeah, that was the week that Vogel got introduced. It was like, when I was conscious, it was like the Bucks were up 2-0 on the Raptors in the Eastern Conference semis or the Eastern Conference Finals, whatever it was. And I was intubated for like 5 days, and I came back, and it was like, it's very weird coming back too. You're not like all the way back. Good times. Welcome to the pod, Harrison.
Good times indeed.
All right, we're already off the rails.
I'm glad I can finally make it while you're awake to approve of it. You know, Darius had to get me in the back door the last time, and so I appreciate finally the sign off. 8 years in.
Well, we'll see how it goes. Gary Trent Jr. How do you feel about him, Harrison?
I think obviously, like, he's not. There were all those reports that he was sort of looking for like a $25 million a year salary. Obviously, ended up signing for way less than that with the Bucks. And like, I think, he's obviously not a $25 million player. I don't think, like, this market, whatever market, he's not, but he's still a lot better than a veterans minimum player. And, I think normally, like, that's the kind of guy, in the spirit of things that you guys can say, now that you're unaffiliated, independent media, that's normally the type of sort of clutch rehab project that would end up on the Lakers roster. But I think as a result of sort of some things that happened, in past years where they were just sort of handing out these player options to the veterans minimum market like candy, and guys opting in after disappointing years, there aren't roster spots for him right now. And then in addition to, I think you guys got into this on a pod earlier this week, or, I remember listening to someone talk about it. There's like probably at least 5 guys on this team who aren't expected to play like regular NBA minutes. And, when you are using 5 roster spots like that, and you sort of have all these veterans minimum opt-ins, there's just like, people have talked about, including myself, about the Lakers' quiet sort of disappointing free agency, but it's like, you can't sign people if you don't have roster spots. And how do you salary dump a veterans minimum player? Nobody's just going to take them just to do that favor for you, and but also, like, you're not going to attach a first round pick to move off of, like, Christian Wood or something like that, just to throw a name out.
See, for me, I look at this from 2 perspectives. The roster spot stuff is less of a concern to me at this point in the offseason. You can have as many players rostered as you want. You don't have to cut down to 15 until the regular season begins. And so my sense is, if the Lakers wanted to sign Trent now to a veteran minimum deal, they could have signed Trent now if that's what Gary Trent wanted. So I'm looking at this more from the perspective of Trent. And Trent's likely going to walk right into a starting role and playing anywhere between 25 and 35 minutes a night for an Eastern Conference contender, and playing with a guy that he's played with before, and Damian Lillard, and probably, Pete, a guaranteed big role. And he would be coming to the Lakers on a veteran minimum contract where it's just like, are you going to play that significant a role here? And I would argue he wouldn't be. He'd likely be a rotation player. To me, he would clearly be in the top 8 or 9 players. Would he start? The projected starting lineup right now is going to include D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reeves. He's not displacing either of those players. The Lakers just invested in Max Knecht. They just drafted Dalton Knecht. Trent could easily argue, I'm better than Max Knecht. I think that's arguable, but he could argue that.
Max hasn't done anything
and
yet.
He could easily say, I'm much better than a 22-year-old rookie that is showing some flashes in summer league, but like, I should be playing over those guys. But that's going to be a head coach's decision. And my sense is that he likely got some good information from the people in Milwaukee, he's going to be one of the key wing players. And we saw this with a player like Malik Monk. Monk probably could have gone to any number of teams and made a little bit more money than the veteran minimum, but potentially not had a guaranteed role on a team that was trying to do something and the chance to get back into the market the following year. And so I don't look at this as much like a Lakers failure and that stuff. I know that there's a lot of that out there right now, but I'm more looking at this from, I'm standing in Gary Trent's shoes, and what is the best opportunity for me to recoup the things that I want to recoup in terms of financial and role and all of that. And to me, that's likely in Milwaukee instead of in Los Angeles.
Yeah, the vet minimum market is very interesting. And it's part of the reason why vet mins get player options, which I'll get to in a moment. But it's actually more competitive than like the taxpayer MLE, which is around 5 million, or the full MLE, which is what, 12 or 13 these days, because every team has access to it. And so a lot of the market dynamics shift when you talk about vet min guys, because the guys that are on higher tiers, it's like there are 4 or 5 teams that could theoretically go after them maybe. Whereas with a vet min guy, especially a guy like Trent, any contender could sign them. And just like you said, D, like he could be a top 8 guy, guy that comes off the bench for a good team. He's probably going to start for a high level playoff team in the East. And so it becomes a decision from the player's standpoint where it's not about the money for now, but it is about the money long term, where that's another dynamic where if he's not coming in to start, you're talking about a guy who's in a position where his goal is to rehab his value. Like Harrison said, like you said, man, like he's coming into free agency. I want 25 million or whatever. And he settles for a vet minimum. His goal is to get playing time, have people at the end of the year be like, yo, Gary Trent's really good. We should pay him the MLE or something like that and kind of get out of that cycle. And that's what Malik did. That's what Dennis Schroeder did. And so that to me is sort of the position they're in. But that's exactly why those type of players value that sort of opportunity. To me, the more interesting question is, why does Cam Reddish have a player option? Why did Jackson Hayes have a player option? Why did Christian Wood have a player option? So I kick that to you, Harrison. What's your thought on that?
I mean, my thought is, I think that you're right in that the veterans minimum market is competitive, and that's why those get offered. It's like, we're just going to close with you. We're going to say, hey, look, we're giving you a player option. These other teams are not doing that, or maybe they're not doing it as quickly. They're saying it maybe is on the table next week, but let's see how things are going, that sort of thing. But I also think that it's just like maybe like a lack of negotiating and more of just trying to sort of be like, seen as player friendly and do agency favors. I mean, like there is like the dynamic there with 2 of those guys are clutch clients, and it's like, hey, the Lakers, I sort of was joking earlier about like the clutch rehab project of the year, but also not really. Like that is generally like the Lakers have generally sort of almost every offseason since LeBron came bought low on some clutch client and tried to help them rehab their value and get back into the market to either get paid by the Lakers or get paid by another team. And unfortunately for them, what happened was, they gave all of these guys player options, and then the worst case scenario happened for all of them, where none of them rehabbed their value to the point where like several of these guys might not even be in the league next year, or, like certainly not getting guaranteed playing time or guaranteed role or, like a guaranteed contract or anything like that. And so I do think that it's one of these situations where, you can say like a veterans minimum. Yeah, it's like literally the least you can give a player. So who cares? Like, it's not going to make that much of a difference on the cap. It's not going to, there's all these things that it doesn't do and that it doesn't take away from you. But when you're building up sort of with like, you got Maxwell Lewis, you have Bronny James, and then you have like sort of these 3 guys that are fringy players and Christian Wood, Jackson Hayes, and and Cam Reddish opt in, and then all of a sudden again that's like 5 roster spots that you don't have. And Darius, I take your point about like they can have up to 20 guys, but I also think it sort of speaks to the larger Trent thing where like, why is he going to come in and be the 16th guy, and have to like theoretically fight for a spot in training camp, even if he thinks he's going to beat those other guys out and make the Lakers, force the Lakers to cut someone that they don't want to cut. Like, it is a less clear cut spot to like, where last year the Bucks had such a big hole at shooting guard that they were saying Malik Beasley was going to be their defensive stopper. Like, Trent can look at that and just be like, hey, I could do a lot better in that role than Malik Beasley can, and potentially rehab my value that way.
Pete, where are you at in terms of the player options? Because I could argue that in the vacuum, you wanted to close each and every one of those vet min guys. Like, I could argue, hey, Christian Wood, he's coming off multiple seasons of being a double-digit scorer, and we had visions of him of being like, oh, you can get this guy at the minimum. Jackson Hayes was a lottery pick, and he's coming off of his rookie contract. Now, maybe they didn't have a role for him in New Orleans, but we could have a role for him here. It's like, I could see the rehab logic and wanting these guys, but to Harrison's point, well, you gave them all player options. And if the worst case scenario is they all opt in, you have to plan for that, right? And I think that where the Lakers are now, it's like, well, not only did all three of these guys opt in, but they used both of their draft picks, which didn't seem like that was going to be on the table 4 months ago, that they would actually draft someone at 17 and draft someone at 55, and both of those guys would be rostered. And then last year, they drafted Maxwell Lewis, and they gave Lewis that second round exception contract, which is a new thing under the CBA, which is the same sort of contract that they're giving to Bronny James, right? So that's guaranteed money in the first year as well. So you start to build up all of these roster spots, and it's tricky. And so do you think it was a mistake to give the player options, or where are you at with that?
Well, so I want to raise it up kind of a level. So one of the main things that coming out of the working for the Lakers that I think that I can say that I believe that I don't, that I wouldn't have said before is that the Lakers roster is sort of a Frankenstein of what several different people want. And everybody gets mad at Pelinka, and he is one of the people, and he's probably the person most responsible for the team building of it. But to your point, Harrison, about the Clutch rehabilitation project, the Clutch guys loved Cam. If you watch the games, you could see this. And whenever Cam would do well, they'd be so excited for him, right? It's like the little brother finding his way type of thing. And so I don't know if this happened or not, but part of the deal with linking up with LeBron and linking up with Clutch is like, yes, you will have influence over what we do. Rather than be like, no, you're the player, we're the boss, you do as we say. That goes all the way back to Dr. Buss and Magic Johnson of being like, you're a partner with us. And so if you're looking for your vet mins, right, you're in a place where the big parts of last offseason, we're just re-signing our guys. So Rui, Austin, D'Lo, all multi-year deals, although D'Lo's was a 1+1. When you get to, so all you have left really are vet mins. And so if there is sort of this collective brain trust and Clutch comes in, and I do not know that this actually happened, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did, because like you said, we do sign a lot of Clutch guys, and they're like, hey, we got Cam. And this already plays into the Malik Monk reclamation project, where like we always chase our victories, right? And one of the things I thought they did really well under the 3-star build was find a couple of guys that were like, yo, that guy's really talented, but for whatever reason, available for a vet min, mid-20s. Let's see if he can do better in a different situation. And so I see why there's synthesis there between like Clutch possibly going like, hey, let's go after Cam on a vet min, right? And then from the Lakers' perspective, being like, yeah, we've had success with these kind of guys. And you can kind of see how they get there. But and so in the realm of it being this competitive market of vet min guys, did Cam have another team that was interested in him that was going to, like, that to me seems unlikely to force you into a player option type of point. But just from a bigger picture perspective, like, I think one of the issues with the Lakers is that is the roster is a Frankenstein of some sorts, where it's not one cohesive vision kind of filtering down. Does that make sense?
No, I think it does. And like, I just want to add on the vet min thing is just like, you can say, hey, if the cost of not offering the player option is you don't get Cam Reddish, like that, then fine.
Exactly.
Like, that's easy for all of us to say now in retrospect. But like for them, it's like if, like, let's just say hypothetically, LeBron and Rich Paul are like, no, we really want to bring this guy in. We think that alongside me, like, he's going to be able to show a lot better and be able to play a lot better. Like, do you really let that get in the way of just sort of getting that done? Like, even a guy that's not Clutch, like Christian Wood, at the end, you could say it's August. No team has signed him yet. Do we really need to give him a player option?
Harrison, teams were competing over him. Miami wanted him, right? There were a couple of teams that wanted. We're late on the break. Let's take a break, come back, and get at it.
And so my point with the Christian Wood thing was not that no one else is competing for him, but like if Anthony Davis and Darvin Ham are calling him every day, are you going to tell them like, hey, no, we're not willing to give this guy a player option to get the deal across the finish line,
exactly.
You know, and that sort of thing. And so there is like sort of those complicating factors. And then I think the other thing that comes into a discussion with a guy like Trent is you can say, you know, every year the Lakers sort of do this thing where they either say they're leaning in on continuity and we're running it back and we want a full training camp with everyone, or it's like, well, you know, the roster's not that great, but we have until the trade deadline to fix it. This is the cost of waiting until the trade deadline to fix it in some ways, where, you know, you're still using the roster spot. Not that D'Lo's like taking up a roster spot or something, but you don't have you don't know how the roster is going to look after you make a big move like that if you're waiting until midseason to do stuff like that, which could end up costing you guys like Trent, you know, where they don't see the cohesive vision. They don't know which scenario, which path you're going to pick that is going to lead. Like, is it going to be D'Lo's out for like a wing and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, there's a lot of backcourt minutes available for me? Or, you know, is he just going out for like, you know, again, DeJounte Murray's presumably not on the table, but if it was something like that last year where you're just sort of replacing him with another, you know, high minutes guard. And so this is sort of the cost of waiting to fix the roster, I think, until midseason in some ways as well.
So it's interesting to me because I'm more of the mind that it's just like we often pit decision makers that we don't like as being puppets of outside factors. It could very well be that Rob Pelinka was just like, hey, AD's been saying he wants another big to play with. Let's get him two, potentially.
Get him DeAndre Jordan and a very old Dwight Howard.
Let's get him two really skinny ones, you know? Let's get him two really slender ones that, you know, have some of the same weaknesses that he does.
Well, it's interesting, though, Harrison, because Wood is a spacing big and Hayes is a rim running big. You could envision there being two big lineups with Anthony Davis in which he is the versatile guy that complements the strengths of that other player, right? And so to Pete's idea of a Frankenstein roster, I could see an overarching vision where it's just like, hey, we're going to play a floor spacing big next to LeBron and AD, and that's going to work in this specific way. And we saw that early in the season with big wins against Phoenix, for example. And then we could envision scenarios where LeBron is off the court, but here's AD and Jackson Hayes, and Hayes is running pick and rolls a lob, and AD is spaced out, and he's taking jumpers, and it looks more like the 2020 build, right? Where Hayes is in that Dwight Howard role or JaVale McGee role, and AD is the versatile big. But to Pete's point, that requires a certain amount of synergy between big picture ideas of this is how I'm envisioning the roster, and this is how it's going to be implemented through playing time and rotation and everything else. And it turns out that the head coach at the time didn't envision a world in which all three of those bigs would be playing a role all at the same time. It turns out that Wood was in direct competition for minutes with Jackson Hayes. And they were both never significantly in the rotation at the same time. Further, it was never an idea that Wood would play with AD at all if LeBron wasn't on the court. And AD would basically never play with Hayes at all, ever. You could see a plan that some of these moves were made in order to support Anthony Davis, but in the big picture, that is not how it played out. It didn't come to fruition like that. And so to me, a bigger idea about team building and roster construction is going to be the through line between what Rob is doing to build out the roster and what Redick is doing to implement that roster into real world minutes, real world rotation ideas, and how this is going to play out. Because if that synergy does not exist, you end up with guys who are on vet minimum contracts who basically don't play. And now they're taking up roster spots while you also have rostered second round picks that in other situations, they may not even have a guaranteed roster spot, right? So it's a tricky thing. And this is how you end up with thinking about, well, the roster's full and a potential free agent get like Gary Trent is sort of looking like, well, you know what? I don't want to compete for all of those minutes or slot in where I fit in. Milwaukee saying, maybe I'm going to start, or I'm at least going to be their sixth man. And that's ideal for me.
Milwaukee had a great, they got Trent, they got DeLon Wright, and who's the third guy I'm missing?
They got Taurean Prince to reunite with Darvin Ham.
Yes. Yes, of course.
The Prince really who was promised. He's back.
Yes. And I think in every case, there's a certain amount of hey, you've got some playing time waiting for you. And from the Lakers' perspective, I think a lot of it comes to Max and Knecht too. And where big picture sense and thinking of them as trade assets. I'd like to watch those dudes play for the Lakers for the next several years and get better and be part of title teams. But one of the best things the Lakers can do between now and the trade deadline is have one or both of Max and Knecht be considered hey, that guy's pretty good. Knecht's contract's 4 years, $18 million. Max is $432, both under 10. If either guy can play and has a little bit of that, hey, he can hit a three, grab a rebound, and play some defense, to varying degrees, of course, right? But those guys are gold in the NBA and in NBA trades. But right now, both of those guys are unknowns. For as much as we like Max, he hasn't actually done it. And he has elements of his game that he's definitely going to have to improve upon. But I think that there's a certain level of you got to see it before teams are really going to go after guys like that. And so just a wrinkle to throw into the asset management and all of that. I think that's part of the reason why you don't go after but that's part of the reason why a Trent is less appealing, is that hey, we've got kind of bigger goals. We need to make a trade that is fairly significant, I think, to win a championship. So none of my arguments are against that. I think the timing of it, Harrison, you were talking about the idea, and I'll kick it to you on this, about the idea of this is sort of the price you pay for waiting until the trade deadline. I would argue that the market conditions of the offseason are harsher than they are at the trade deadline so think of D'Lo's value, right? D'Lo's a weird player from a trade value standpoint because if you're looking to tank, he's actually harmful because he's going to win you some games. He's too good, but if you're looking to win a championship, he has some playoff struggles, right? But from the perspective of an expiring contract, to the team that's receiving the expiring contract, there isn't value to that trade until the offseason, right? The whole point that someone would trade for D'Lo as an expiring contract is the value that he provides for shedding salary that following offseason. So there's really no point for them to make the trade now, right? Trading for an expiring contract right now makes no difference to them versus trading for them at the deadline. And so there's a certain amount of oh yeah, Walker Kessler is available. For 2 first-round picks?
I think you're right in that prices are always going to be higher during the offseason because teams, they can ask for the moon and just be well, we're content going into training camp, whatever. There's no deadline, or there are very few deadlines. In some cases, the Markkanen thing, obviously, the Lakers haven't really been linked to him, but there's that, extension deadline that is very much teams are sort of trying to get something done before with the Jazz, before that date and, figure his future out there. But there's not that many cases like that. And so in the offseason, teams can say, hey, we're just going to wait, or teams can sort of delude themselves into being hey, we think we're going to be better than we actually are. And, and then, they sort of get more desperate towards the trade deadline where it's okay, actually, we're not that good. And we probably should just sell, some of these players that sort of don't fit the direction of our team to get assets and sort of help with our rebuild down the line. And so I don't want to dismiss that, but I do also think, there are also market factors, that work in your favor in the offseason in the case of a trade, being able to, make trades where you don't have to, if you do 3 for 1, you don't have to immediately cut 2 players because there's the in-season limit of stuff like that, and then have that money on your book anyway. And so I think there's factors working for and against it. And then I guess to your point on Knecht and Max, those guys are valuable not just as trade assets, but they would also be valuable for the Lakers if they show that they can play at those level of salaries. And then the other thing that I don't know that this front office has shown that they, have sort of the stomach to move on from guys that they feel are a win for their resume. We've seen with them making Austin Reeves untouchable in trade talks for, Kyrie Irving, whatever. Obviously, there were lots of other scenarios and, factors going into those decisions at that time. But this is a front office that very much likes to tout their wins. It's we scouted this guy, or we traded for this guy, Rui, and we got to extend him because he was really good and we found him as a gem. And so, Yeah, THT. And so if Max and Knecht ball out, I'm not confident that we're not going to get an athletic story about how, the Lakers have taken Dalton Knecht off the table in any trade discussions for any player. They value what he brings to their young core too much and whatever. I can already see that in my head. And so there is that factor going into this stuff as well, where even if those guys ball out, I think it's going to have to be they're showing that they can help the Lakers, because I'm not positive that this front office has shown that they'll just make them a throw in into a trade.
Yeah.
The other side of this, too, is one thing we'll never know is how, at least we'll never know for certain, I think there are whispers around this around the league, is how opposing teams view the Lakers' position in all of this and how desperate are they. I think of trade negotiations a lot of times like a hand of poker.
Yeah.
So, Harrison, you brought up the Lauri Markkanen and stuff. I'm not going to frame this from the Lakers' perspective. I'm just going to frame this in general because Danny Ainge has a long history as an executive in this league. Yes. And so Danny Ainge is the type of basketball decision maker where he wants everything you have, right? And that's where the negotiation starts. It starts from the perspective of, what do you have to offer? Oh, all of that? I want all of that. Hand it over and you get the thing that you want from me. And so those reports with the Warriors, Pete, it's just I want Kuminga, I want Podziemski, I want Moody, and
what was it? It was 4 picks and 3 swaps or something that they were reporting. Danny Ainge's negotiating strategy is it's you're walking into a restaurant and it's well, how much is that burger? And they're well, how much do you have in your wallet? And they're can you hold it open? Just let us see how much is in there. It's oh yeah, that works. I'll take all that.
Do you have a coin purse too? Oh, yeah. Yes. Open up the coin purse too. And this isn't just a Danny Ainge thing. This is a league-wide thing. A lot of times when opposing teams know that you really want to do something, they will hold your feet to the fire. And this is the price that the Lakers paid for Anthony Davis, right? It wasn't just in a real world scenario, the idea of it's going to cost you X in order to get Y. The Lakers gave up 2 number 2 overall picks, another player who was a success story that was late from the first round in Josh Hart, and then multiple first round picks and swaps and all of this other stuff. That was the cost of doing business when the other team knows or believes you need to get this done in order to make this thing happen. It wouldn't surprise me if Rob is, based off of the conversations that he's having around the league, that he's just oh, the reports about the Jeremy Grant stuff, for example. Well, for you, it's going to cost 2 first-round picks. And that's we think you're desperate. So you give us this. And I'm going to write about this for Silver Screen and Roll. Jeremy Grant's on a bad contract. It's long as hell.
Do you remember when we were supposed to trade Russell Westbrook for John Wall, and we were supposed to attach a first to Russell Westbrook?
John Wall is no longer in the league.
No, the Grant thing has been killing me. I'm sorry. The Grant thing has just, it's an exact example of what we're talking about of what you're talking about they're thinking that you're desperate. And also, why do they have to trade Grant right now? They can go into the season with them. He's not too good to allow them to tank and things like that. They can hope that, hey, if they won't give us 2 first round picks now, maybe they'll give us 1 at the deadline or whatever. We'll still get something for him.
And that's why the prices are higher right now.
It is. And
we don't have much money.
And if other teams view the Lakers as weak or desperate or needing to make a move, which is how we even started this part of the conversation, which was the framing of a slow offseason and the need to make a change. And Pete, you even said the Lakers are at least 1 big move away from being a championship contender. We're just podcasters. If you're Sean Marks or you're Masai Ujiri or your name GM X, they're you know what? The Lakers want to win a championship. LeBron James is entering his year 22 season and is going to turn 40 in December. AD is 31 and square in the middle of his prime. They have health factors and yada, yada, yada. If they want to win a championship, they need to make a move. Oh, now you're calling me? And you want me to be the guy who helps facilitate your move? Guess what that's going to cost? And that idea then of saying, it's like negotiating a car, you better have the will to walk away. regardless of how much you want the vehicle, if you want to say at the end, I didn't get fleeced. And after the Russ trade, when it went really poorly for the Lakers, like on the back end, it's not about being gun shy to me. It's about properly evaluating risk reward and understanding this is not necessarily the time.
We don't have a lot of money, and in terms of money being trade assets and, coveted assets, so we cannot afford to get fleeced. Let's take our last break and we'll come back and keep it going. We were in the same position 2 off seasons ago. We have the season with Russ. You go into the off season and it's like, even at the trade deadline, right? That's when the John Wall rumors were. But then you go into the off season and it's like, you cannot possibly bring Russell Westbrook back. That's the prevailing thought, right? But it was the correct decision to wait until the deadline because that's when the value of Russ would convey as a massive, and this is one of the underrated parts of the transaction in the first place, is that the next year it'd be this huge expiring contract that other teams seek out financial flexibility in ways that I think that fans can kind of sometimes undervalue. And I think that's going to be even more so the case with how burdensome the second apron is in this new, I don't understand the new CBA that well yet, but I do think that teams are going to seek out a certain level of financial flexibility where it's like, oh, we signed this guy to a 4-year, $82 million contract and he kind of stinks. And it's really hard to build anything good when you've got that, so that sort of, so we were in that same position, and that was the offseason where it was like, oh, you got to attach a first to an expiring contract in order to get off of Russ. But what actually happened was very different. And so that to me is sort of this is a less severe version of that, but I totally get the fan sentiment of you can't possibly go into this season with the same team thinking that you're trying to win a championship. It's LeBron age 40. I totally get the angst around that. All I'm arguing is that we have 2 first-round picks to trade. We have the stuff with Austin is interesting because he is on a good value contract, which puts him on sort of a higher tier than you might hear him in trade rumors with other guys. And it's like, why is Austin untouchable for that guy? With the Kyrie thing, I think that was more Kyrie was how he was.
There was a lot of stuff going on. I'm not going too hard on them for not doing that. I would not have done it at the time. So to be clear, but it's just him being off, just Austin Reeves is untouchable is sort of kind of a wild sentence, even with the contract thing.
I don't think he is. I don't think he is. I just think that there's a certain level of we need a certain tier of player to come back if Austin's going to come out. And I think it's reasonable.
Austin makes 8% of the cap and is probably a starting level player on, I don't know, 26 NBA teams, 27 NBA teams. Austin Reeves is good. The idea that you made, or the point that you were making, Pete and Harrison, about Knecht and Max potentially being players and how valuable that would be at their contract level. Austin Reeves is proof positive of that. One of the reasons why they can pay Rui and all of these other guys high teens in terms of millions is because Austin Reeves isn't making $25 million a year. The whole idea of a second apron, the point about LeBron potentially being able to take a pay cut in order to open up the full mid-level, which would have capped the Lakers out the first apron, a part of that is because they have a starting quality player making $12 million a year. Austin makes $1 more million than Gabe. He's on an MLE contract and isn't a guy who is going to be your 6th or 7th or 8th man. He's a starting level player. So the value of that in relation to a world that is now essentially a hard cap world, because there's maybe 1 or 2 teams that are going to be willing to pay the second apron. And even if they do, they're only going to want to do it for a season, because once you're in it for multiple seasons, your draft picks get frozen.
I think you can generally do it, in my understanding, is for 2 seasons. And then most teams are going to want to get out because it's that 3rd year, I believe, when your draft pick gets sent to the back of the first round. I think.
There's all these team building ramifications that it's now the GMs and the basketball decision makers who are going to be going to their owners and saying, this is too prohibitive. So even if you wanted to spend the money, I'm handcuffing myself here in terms of roster building stuff, and we can't do it. So I say all this not to like give Rob a pass or any of that. I think the Lakers need to make at least a move. I would argue that they need to make multiple moves. I think they need to clear out the back end of their roster. I think that they need to clear up some cap space. I would love for them to be able to open up enough room for them to use their tax MLE, or at least give them some maneuverability underneath the second apron. Right now, they're like $45K under the second apron. I would prefer that be closer to $1 million or $2 million, the type of breathing room so that you're not sitting there stuck like, oh, I absolutely can't do X or else I'm over the second apron. And then that limits anything that you can do from a transaction standpoint. So I'm just more where Pete is. It's just like the season doesn't even start until October. And is it ideal from a continuity standpoint? No, it's not. I would much rather have the team that's going to finish the season in place at the start of the season. But I don't know. Kids also want ponies. It's just like you can't get everything you want, right? So I'm sitting here thinking, and my perspective is patience is not only needed or desired, it's required in a lot of ways because there's a lot of contextual stuff that needs to play out first before the Lakers can build the team they actually need to build to get to the level they want to get to.
It's crying over spilled milk to a degree, but I think it's important to acknowledge, though, that part of why we're $45K up against the second apron is by giving essentially multi-year contracts to players who have not established themselves as playoff level rotation guys. And so I understand it's a more competitive market, and that I don't think at the time let me ask you this, Steve, would they have known at the time the second apron rules and all of that when they're signing? Like, what's the timeline on that?
The CBA, it's my understanding, the CBA was already in place at the summertime of last season, but it was understood that those rules were going to be phased in. So
this summer,
there were
a lot of the more onerous ones only came into it. Like that's why the Suns were able to package multiple minimum guys together to go get Royce O'Neal last year, is because they weren't going to be able to aggregate minimums moving forward, given where their salary structure was at.
Yes,
right. So to me, that's a point worth making, is that like a guy like Cam, you can see he had that great November, and there's certainly potential there, right? But if the environment was going to be more limiting, especially by salary, that these little $2.8 million contracts, a $3 million contract they really add up in a way that has put the Lakers in a spot where there's not a lot of maneuverability just yet.
The flip side is like, look at a team like the Suns. They gave second year options to several of their minimum players, and a bunch of those guys didn't pick up their options. Right. And so Eric Gordon got the same second year option that Cam Reddish got. Eric Gordon said, I'm going to play for Philly.
But like Eric Gordon's been a good player in the NBA before.
100%. And that's why I'm with you in the stance of who are you negotiating with and against, and where is the value proposition in terms of offering the second year? So the Lakers did the second year thing way back when with another player, and I was perfectly happy when they did this. They did it to get Marc Gasol, right? And they gave Marc Gasol a second year player option, even though it was potentially likely that he might retire, and they would still give him that money, potentially, right? And so there were a lot of factors at play, but they closed the deal in that way. To me, Marc Gasol was a championship level player who was at the end of his career, but he had playoff metal, right? And so saying, we're going to close the deal with you by doing this, like, you understand that. Like, I was actually, and I'm happy, I want to put Hayes to the side here. To me, it's more about like Wood and Cam, because those are the two guys that feel like their reputations were such that it's like, okay, well, if we don't get you, then we don't get you. Like, but I actually kind of wanted Jackson Hayes. I'm like, this dude's 24 years old or 23 years old. He's coming off of his rookie contract, and I think he can play a little bit and particularly help the team in the ways that he helped the team exactly towards the end of the season. And so I don't mind that Hayes opted in. I'm actually happy that he opted in. I would argue I'm less thrilled about now dealing with the consequences of Cam and Wood being on the roster, considering I don't see a clear path to playing time for either of them. And that's a tricky thing when now you're trying to figure out exactly how to maneuver the roster spots 9 through 12, which in reality are very important roster spots, Pete, when you consider the grind of an 82 game season.
And then can I just add that I think, as we're talking about the flexibility stuff, with Maxwell Lewis, for example, one thing that the Lakers have not really explored is, a lot of teams draft guys in the second round. Like the second round has almost become like free agency where like we saw it where a guy like Austin can force his way out of the draft because he's like, I'm not taking a two-way contract. Like was Maxwell Lewis going to say, I'm not taking a two-way contract? Maybe he was. I don't know. Like I'm sure the Lakers, maybe they had those discussions, but the one thing that the Lakers haven't really explored is, trying to draft guys in the second round that are willing to take a two-way if they're going to be a developmental project like that, which then sort of gives you, again, more of that flexibility on the back end of the roster. And there are some teams that do that. The Lakers have not historically been one of them.
How good has our development been the last few years? Sorry, I'm going to leave that one hanging. We will discuss that later as the offseason continues. I want to thank everybody after Monday's announcement, just the support that I got. I'm so touched, and thank you. This has been a wild ride for sure, and just I'm very much relying on the support of Laker fans at this point, and I'm gonna work my butt off to get content produced. So anyway, thank you very much for your support. It was super fun to talk about an actual transaction in this level of detail and sort of like the bigger picture stuff that goes into that. There's going to be a lot more of that.
You didn't have to say, if there was a 3-and-D wing that was available, or sort of 3-and-D guard that was perhaps going to sign with a team on the East Coast, that the Lakers were to mayhaps miss out on, you don't have to jump through hoops anymore.
I'm sorry. I'm sure that was very irritating to listen to.
Everyone knew what we were talking about.
People knew. I'm sure it was fun for you guys just to be able to say Gary Trent Jr. and like mention guys that you would be like, maybe we can cut this guy, and that sort of thing.
Yes. I will say, we definitely turned it into an art. Remember the year that ESPN pushed back and said, we don't want our newsbreakers breaking the NBA draft picks? And so Woj came up with like 1,000 different terms.
All the euphemisms? Yeah.
He got the thesaurus out that night. He was like scrolling through. They are lasered in on this guy.
That was us every pod. All right, we got to go. You've been listening to Laker Film Room Podcast. We'll catch you guys next time.
James has got it in low to McHale. McHale wants to turn. He's double teamed. Just pass out in front. Broken up by Worthy. Tip to Magic. Worthy dives on his belly. Magic scores.
There's Magic got it. Magic fires. Again, the Lakers win the game. The Lakers win the game. Rebound is Lonnie. 3 seconds left. Van Exel to win it. It's on the way. Good!
Kobe Bryant, 48 points, 16 rebounds. Shot with his 8th block shot that ties an NBA Finals record.
A lot of Laker fans sticking around for this.
You're seeing something that's very rare indeed. A Laker to get MVP chance
in Boston. Of all places.
Are you kidding me?
Kobe, hard to believe.
Are you kidding me? Unreal. Are you kidding me?
Lakers looking to push. Bryant spinning in the lane. Back for Gasol. Pretty pass. And it's back to a 3-point game.
Kobe Bryant picked up by Bell.
There's the move. 2, 1.
Listen!
Unbelievable. For the victory. It's over.
Shot clock now to 5. Bryant.
Yes. And that was a little tap to Alvin Gentry.
Add insult to injury, Kobe. I mean, what a shot. I mean, you can't defend that. Are you kidding me?
2.1 seconds remaining. Denver a foul to give. Jokic trying to disrupt Rondo. He puts it in. Here's Davis, 4-3 in the win. Oh, it's good! Anthony Davis has won it for the Lakers! James again. Oh, he hits another one. LeBron James putting together a closing quarter against the Nuggets.
This historic 2020 NBA championship belongs to the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers conquer the bubble, and banner number 17 will soon hang in the rafters.